This is the Tom Barnard Show. Filling in for Tom, I'm Dave Schrader, along with
Doug Sprinthal.
Andy Brant Barnard.
Cassie Schrader.
Stay tuned. We've got a great show lined up for you right after this. Well, let's
Willis is here.
Oh, he is great. We've got joining us on the line right now and promoting his book, Frustrated Witness, the true story of the Adam Walsh case and police misconduct. Willis Morgan, who was an eyewitness at the mall the day that Adam Walsh was taken. But rather than a sense of relief when the Hollywood Police Department finally convicted a suspect, Otis Toole, in 2008, he felt sick and frustrated because he knows that they got the wrong guy. Willis, thank you for joining us on the Tom Barnard Show.
Well, thank you.
Talk to us through this case. It was just to kind of catch people up. 6-year-old Adam Walsh was abducted from the Hollywood, Florida Mall on July 27, 1981. His severed head would be found later at the Florida Turnpike, and no one could have guessed that it would take police almost 30 years to find the culprit, or that they even got it wrong, and that they were so wrong on this. Why, Willis, do you believe that Otis Toole, who is a well-known ne'er-do-well and believed serial killer who admitted to many crimes over his life and career, why do you think they've got the wrong guy?
Well, because it's not just me that believes that. It's all the original detectives that were involved in the Adam Walsh case. They all adamantly dismissed Otis Toole and say he is not involved, including the FBI agent that interviewed Otis Toole. He completely dismissed Otis Toole, as well as the FBI agent who interviewed another infamous serial killer that the one they dismissed, Jeffrey Dahmer, and said Dahmer is very likely the suspect, and he believes Dahmer gave him as close to a confession as you can get. And the reason Otis Toole is dismissed, Dave, because you interviewed other witnesses,
right?
Like Ginger Keaton and her son Terry Keaton. That incident mirrors the Hollywood Mall incident, where a mother went to the mall and with her son, left her son in the toy department. But the only difference between that incident and the Hollywood Mall incident is that Reve went to shop for a lamp, Ginger went to shop for a dress. Other than that, it's a very exact similar case, including the blue van that was parked right by the fire lane.
Now, for a lot of people, John Walsh, if you don't know, from America's Most Wanted, was the father of Adam Walsh, and this unfortunate, tragic event definitely spurned a justice warrior into the world who has done his best to make sure that children and other people would be protected and safe. So there is some silver lining to this tragedy, but this guy's life is so unbelievable. I don't know, do you listen to audiobooks at all?
I do.
Yeah. His story, when you realize all that really went on behind this, not only did his kid go missing, but then they start interviewing his wife and his best friend, only to find out that they've been having an affair.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And she wouldn't leave him because of Adam, so now they're questioning the best friend. Maybe you took Adam so that he'd be out of the mix and you two could be together. Suddenly your world goes from topsy-turvy to completely upside down. And to live through the death of a child is unbearable to even think of, but then to just have every wall around you collapse. Wow. I can kind of understand where John might be a little bit more distracted or a little bit more in denial regarding all of this because he's been dragged through so much over these 30 years. But the evidence you've amassed is pretty compelling. Willis, why don't you get us started on that? How did you first come to believe that the killer was, in fact, Jeffrey Dahmer?
Well, because I had an encounter with him at the mall on the same day that Adam was abducted. I went to the mall. See, I was off on that Monday from my work, where I worked for the Miami Herald, the largest newspaper in Florida. So I was going to the Hollywood Mall to eat at the German deli, okay? This is like a little market, a deli, restaurant, everything in one. And it was in that mall. It was very, very popular, a restaurant there. And I was going there to get a pastrami sandwich. But before I went there, I decided to stop in Radio Shack, which was almost directly across the hallway from the deli. And it was while I was in that Radio Shack that I had an encounter with this guy. Now, this encounter, I'm trying to keep this condensed, give you a condensed version of this. But this encounter was so bizarre and so intense that I didn't respond to this guy, and he kept trying to start a conversation with me. And I didn't realize till years later he wanted more than just conversation. Most likely he was trying to pick me up, but I didn't want to start a conversation, so I didn't say anything to him. Finally, he stomped out of the Radio Shack, and when he left, this is before Adam was abducted, keep in mind. I knew somebody, I had no idea who, but somebody was going to be in trouble. That's how dangerous this guy looked. And so I was watching him, and I saw him walk into Sears, I saw him walk to the far end, and I still kept watching him, and I saw him walk into the toy department, but at that point, I turned around and went home. It was that evening I heard about an abduction, and I always knew it had to be that guy. When I heard about it on the news, the first thing that came to my mind, that guy did it, he actually did it. That's how certain I was. Now, how can it be that you get this feeling about somebody on the same day and time and location where Adam was abducted, that it could be anybody else but this guy? I just didn't know who this guy was until 10 years later, when I saw his mugshot in the newspaper. And that's when I really started looking into this, trying to figure out what went wrong and why the police kept dismissing me. Because what happened was, when I saw that mugshot, I went back to the Hollywood Police Department, and I brought with me the mugshot from the paper. I actually brought the paper with me, and then I called. We have a storage room, because back then it was before the computer age in 1981, so they had a room. We called it the library, but it was actually a storage room where they stored hard copies of all their newspapers. And so if you wanted to do research, you would have to contact the library, and you would have to have a very close date, because they'd have to go through newspapers and do manual research.
Right.
So there was a charge for this. But since I worked for the Herald, they didn't charge me. It was a free service for me. And I asked them, I said, do you remember the composites that ran in the newspaper for the Adam Walsh case? And they said, yes, of course they remembered. Everybody's so familiar with that case. It's all they talked about down here in South Florida back then. So I said, can you do me a favor? Send me the composite. So I brought that composite to the Hollywood Police Station, and their jaws dropped, because I didn't realize it at the time. That composite was a spitting image of the mugshot in the paper, Jeffrey Dahmer, but it wasn't the composite from the Hollywood Mall. It was from another mall 60 miles north, where that incident I told you about that mirrored the Hollywood Mall. A mother went there with her son. And by the way, see, this case is 37 years old as of last July 27th. Mm-hmm. And when a case drags on for so many years, witnesses pass away. And you've interviewed Ginger Keaton.
Yes, I have.
Right? She just passed away a month ago, so
right.
Yeah, she won't be talking anymore. But I was so thankful that you did do those interviews with her. But anyway, that incident that those witnesses swear was Jeffrey Dahmer and not Ottis Toole, okay? And it couldn't have been Ottis Toole. This was 2 weeks before Adam, on July 13th. Now, the Hollywood Police Department didn't know about that incident until Adam was abducted, and all the witnesses from that incident, from that mall, started calling the Hollywood Police Department, as well as John Atwater, the police chief, telling them, hey, everything matches. We know this has got to be related to your case. A blue van, the composites match, the descriptions match, everything matches. But they dismissed it. You know why? The composite didn't match. The composite from that mall as well as the Hollywood Mall, even though they matched each other, didn't match John Walsh's house guest, James Campbell. And that's the quote from the Sun-Tattler from the lead detective, Jack Hoffman. That's his quote. That's why he dismissed it.
So because it didn't fit the narrative,
each other, so because dismissing James Campbell, they dismissed the police chief, all the witnesses, and that was on July 13th. There's documented evidence showing at that date Ottis Toole was in a hospital in Newport News, Virginia. He wasn't even in the state of Florida. So if you believe those incidents were connected, that automatically eliminates Ottis Toole. These detectives were just too incompetent to figure anything out until 1991, when Jeffrey Dahmer was captured, and I walked back in there with the wrong composite. Their jaws dropped, because they realized right away that was the wrong composite. It was the one from the Twin City Mall that they've been dismissing. Not only that one, but others too, as well as South Beach, Deerfield Beach, There was police chiefs from all over calling them, telling them there's been attempted abductions in their cities. They were dismissing everything. So now, when I went there with that composite,
right,
they knew they messed up big time in 1981, and they went into full cover-up mode. So that's what they're doing. And the Milwaukee police does the same thing. There's murders that happen in the same building where Jeffrey Dahmer lived, the Oxford building, that aren't part of that 17
wow,
that Dahmer's accredited for and admitted to.
Well, now let's talk about that. I know a lot of people, and we've talked about it on other shows, but just for the audience here, spread across Minnesota and around the world, the people that say, well, this doesn't fit Dahmer's MO. He only went for Hispanic or ethnic-looking young men, and that was his attraction. It wasn't children. How do you respond to that?
Well, these people are all part of the cover-up, or they're just totally inept and incompetent. First of all, Adam, as well as Convex and Sazanphone, were both decapitated. Okay? Those were his two youngest victims. If that doesn't fit his MO, I don't know what the heck does.
Right.
Okay, number one. Number two, whether it fits his MO or not, it doesn't account for the fact that he was at the Sears that day in that toy department at the same time and location where Adam was abducted. How do you discount that? There's composites to back up the witness's statement. When I contacted all these witnesses, they said, yes, that's the person they were trying to describe, Jeffrey Dahmer.
That's unbelievable. And just to think, I mean, if it's true, you have Otis Toole, you've got Henry Lee Lucas, and you've got Jeffrey Dahmer all within about a 20-mile radius of one another, actively killing at the same time. That's terrifying.
Incorrect. Otis Toole was never in South Florida except for when they dragged him down here one time. He was in Jacksonville. That's over 300 miles away. He's never been here. That's all just made up by one of the detectives, Joe Matthews. Listen what happened. Joe Matthews is one of the detectives that was involved in the case since its inception. In fact, John Walsh wrote a book, Tears of Rage. The reason for that title is the rage over the way the Hollywood Police Department was conducting the investigation of his son. And he called them in his book a bunch of bumbling, stumbling idiots. Okay? Now, in 1987, I think it was February 8th, Fox TV chose John Walsh to be the host of America's Most Wanted, and the first show aired on February 8th. One of these detectives, his name is Joe Matthews, okay? He heard John got this show. So he called John and befriended him, and John Walsh hired him on America's Most Wanted as the senior lead investigator. So for decades, he was on that show feeding John Walsh all this crap about Otis Toole being the guy.
All right, so
he's one of these. He's the most incompetent of all of them, and he did it. He came to the conclusion that it was Otis Toole without calling not one witness. You've interviewed Amir Taylor. You've interviewed Ginger Key. None of them will tell you that they were ever called by Detective Matthews.
Right. It's terrifying. We've got more information to share. Willis Morgan, our guest this hour, frustrated witness, the true story of the Adam Walsh case and police misconduct when we return to the Tom Barnard Show. We're back on the Tom Barnard Show. In his book, Frustrated Witness, Willis Morgan details his unnerving encounter with serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer in the mall, the other eyewitness accounts of that fateful day, and the major flaws that have been part of the police investigation. This is the account of Adam Walsh's abduction and my attempts stretching across decades to find justice for him, is what Morgan writes. Obviously, this has had to have been brought to John's attention and John Walsh's attention, and being somebody who is thorough and wanting to look through every detail and make sense of this murder of his son. Why do you believe John Walsh has not accepted this or been willing to entertain this as the possibility that Dahmer was the one involved in the death of his son? Well, listen, when Dahmer was first captured, Dahmer's own father, Lionel, called America's Most Wanted and told them that he believes his son murdered Adam. And John Walsh put a lot of credence into what he said, and he called the
South Florida, and kept trying to get the detectives to go up, the lead detective, Jack Hoffman, to go up and interview Dahmer. It took him like 13 months, over a year, to go up there, only after constant prodding by John Walsh and the FBI, because he did not want to interview Jeffrey Dahmer. He was afraid Jeffrey Dahmer might admit to it and open up a can of worms. And so he finally only went up there after John Walsh got a letter from the state attorney's office saying they wouldn't seek capital punishment. And he gave that letter to the detective and asked him, okay, go up there. And the detective tried his last time. He said, listen, we don't have money for that kind of a trip. So John Walsh said, listen, I'm making good money on TV, so I'll pay for it. So he paid for that detective to go up there and with that letter on the concession on the death penalty. But that detective, in the whole interview, because it was a taped interview, nowhere in there does he offer that letter to Jeffrey Dahmer. Nowhere, as John Walsh wanted him to.
How could there have been so many missteps in this case? I mean, it was such an attention grabber. Why do you think that these law enforcement officials got so tunnel visioned on one or two suspects and refused to look at the logic of what else was going on?
Well, because there was just total chaos at the police department. There wasn't one detective in charge. So, all these witnesses that were being dismissed didn't know about another witness. So they were individually being dismissed by different people. And there was nobody keeping track of anything. I mean, John Walsh was right. They are the biggest bunch of bumbling, stumbling idiots since the Keystone Cops. But Joe Matthews, the detective that finally befriended John Walsh, and he's the one that wrote the manuscript that he named after himself, called the Matthews Report, a 400-page report that pinned this on Artist Tool. And he's the detective that wrote a book with a co-author, Les Standiford, titled Bringing Adam Home. And in there, he doesn't mention any of the real witnesses. All the witnesses he mentions in his book are cellmates of Artist Tool who would say things like, yeah, everybody in prison knows he did it. I mean, what kind of evidence is that?
Right. And Artist liked to brag about things. He admitted to it, but then he even recanted his own testimony, correct?
Many times he's recanted. And listen, this past July 27th, a reporter from Fort Lauderdale, her name is Michelle Solomon, she did a 5-episode anniversary podcast on the Adam Walsh case. And in the 5th episode, she interviewed Joe Matthews, she interviewed the detectives from the Hollywood Police Department, as well as myself, and as well as John Walsh. And John Walsh was very adamant about her. I mean, I don't know if John Walsh didn't realize that he was being recorded for a podcast, but his language was pretty colorful. In fact, it was so colorful, she had to give a warning at the beginning of the show about his language. And he told her if she dares, open that show with Jeffrey Dahmer, you will never hear from me again because it's nothing but BS. There's a writer out there trying to write a book and make money off of my son's murder. That's what he told her. So he's in. It's like the Stockholm Syndrome. John Walsh, who wrote a book, Tears of Rage, because of his anger over these detectives, when they finally closed the case and pinned it on Artist Tool, now all of a sudden, these are his best friends and colleagues. And so John Walsh is behind them 100%, and he's behind these. He's stuck on his closing. It's a false closing, and he's stuck on it.
Now,
it's like Patty Hearst. Remember in 1974 when the the Symbionese Liberation Army abducted her, and she became so fond of her abductors that she even robbed a bank with them? It took years after she was finally captured to break her out of that, of psychiatric treatment. And it's the same thing with John Walsh. I don't know if John Walsh will ever come out of his false closure.
Well, let's dip into this a little bit more. Talk to me about the crime scenes that you uncovered as well. I think this is a very important part of the story.
Oh, there's so many. First of all, we have a police report with Jeffrey Dahmer's name all over it. Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer, because in 1981, he was only a witness, to a dead man that was found. Now, nowadays, if we knew Jeffrey Dahmer found a dead man, you'd be very, very suspect.
Right.
But they weren't in 81. They had no idea that he was an infamous serial killer, but because back then they didn't know anything except he had Stephen Hicks. He did that we know about, and there's possible murders in Germany, and that's all. They didn't even know about any of that. So Jeffrey Dahmer was just a witness. What happened was Jeffrey Dahmer was booted out of the Army, trying to keep this condensed again. On March 26, 1981, he flew to Miami because, when you get relieved of duty from the Army, when you're discharged, they give you whatever monies they owe you, and I believe he had about $850, something like that I calculated from his DD-214 money he had in his pocket, that in 1981 dollars, he came to Miami with a free plane ticket because you get a voucher when you get discharged, and you can take it to the airport, and that voucher is good for any city within the United States. So he decided to come to Miami, and then he worked his way over to Miami Beach, and then he ran out of money, so he started dumpster diving, and this guy saw him dumpster diving behind his store. His name is Ken Halbert, and the store was called Sunshine Subs. It was a sub shop, and he felt sorry for this guy, so he gave him a sandwich. A couple of days later, he went out to dump the garbage, and he saw him out there eating out of the dumpster again, and he hired him as a busboy, and that's how he got a job. I mean, I guess his resume was dumpster diving. For only one I know that used dumpster diving as a resume to get a job. But anyway, he got hired as a busboy, and that was on that police report. After he was hired, according to Ken, after about 10 days of Dahmer working for him, Dahmer comes back in. It was his turn to take the garbage out now. Not his turn, his job, because, as the busboy, at the end of the shift, around 5 o'clock, it was his job to take the garbage out. So he comes out. He comes back into the store, and he says, whispers to Ken in a very monotone voice. He says, "Hey, Ken, by the way, there's a dead man by your dumpster." So Ken goes out to look. Sure enough, there's a dead guy there. So he calls the police. The police show up. They want to know who found the body. He says, "My busboy." He says, "Well, get him out here. We need to talk to him." That's how Jeffrey Dahmer got his name all over this police report. But everything in the police report is inconsistent with what he's been telling his boss. And the guy only had one shoe on. So Dahmer, in the police report, said that the guy was sleeping in the meter room behind the store. So they went to look in the meter room, and that's where they found the other shoe, and that's when it hit me. This is where he brought Adam, because I always knew that Jeffrey Dahmer, since that encounter I had, I knew he was there, was the guy. But I just had no clue where he could have brought Adam. In fact, even when after Adam was abducted, I even joined some of the search teams to look for Adam. I mean, we were looking in people's backyards through garbage bins and you name it. And I spent a whole day out looking for Adam because I felt guilty about, just turning around and leaving. And so anyway, everything was inconsistent. So I knew that had to be the place he brought Adam, because I've always heard that, usually when someone is abducted, they bring them back to some place they're familiar with and they feel more comfortable with. So anyway, a TV show got involved in that, ABC Primetime, and they flew down from New York, and they did a TV show about the meter room. They hired this CSI expert. Her name is Jan Johnson. She's supposed to be one of the best in the state, and she did a field test on this blood spatter that she described as being indicative of a homicidal pattern on that back wall. Keep in mind, this dead man that Dahmer, quote-unquote, found didn't have any blood on him. So it wasn't his blood.
So it wasn't him. So that means
somebody else.
But it was a
homicide in that meter room.
Right.
Somebody died in that meter room, and the police refused to investigate. Now, so how is that? When you have a case like this and they refuse to even investigate? Somebody died. It was described as being indicative of a homicidal pattern and proof positive for blood, but they could never get DNA out of it. With a field kit, the swab turned purple, which is a positive ID for blood, as blood. But they never could get DNA out of it because it was 27 years at that time,
right,
or 20 20, 20.
I got to guess the humidity and just the relative...
And the mortared wall
Right.
with the lime in it. If you ever work with lime or cement, you know how it eats your hands away. I mean, so the DNA never had a chance to get DNA. But anyway, so there's a crime scene, and the police don't want to investigate. So that's the one of the scenes. And also that place where Dahmer worked, also there was a blue van. Okay, there was two stores, a pizza store and a sub shop. One guy owned them. His name is Mike Pelletier. And Ken Halbert managed the sub shop for him. So they had 3 vehicles for the pizza store that did pizza deliveries. And nowadays, I know a lot of these pizza places, you use your own vehicle and you just put a sign on the roof. But back then, that wasn't that common. The stores had their own vehicles. At least this store did. So they had 3 vehicles. And they never really used the blue van except in the wintertime when it got more busy because, this is Sunny Isles in Florida is a tourist area. There's all hotels right along the ocean there, big hotels. So they get a lot of traffic down here in the wintertime. But this was, keep in mind, this is in June of 81. So this is in the middle of the summer, or July, I should say, of 81. So this is in the middle of the summer. So it was very slow, so they only used the 2 white vans. The blue van was mostly just sitting in the back of the parking lot. So all the employees were taking it and using it.
They all had access to it.
Dahmer.
Did anybody ever complain or say that there was any kind of weird smell or residue, anything at any point that might have led them to believe that Adam had been transported in the van at one point?
No, not really. Not that I ever heard or know of. But Adam wasn't necessarily murdered in that van. Where the blood spatter is where I believe he was murdered, in that meter room. And according to one of the witnesses, I believe Adam's severed head may have been put in a bucket and transported to the place where it was found. The reason I say that is because his severed head was found on August 10th. Keep in mind, Adam was abducted on July 27th, so we're talking about several weeks after his abduction. The severed head was found. Okay, that would be, again, August 10th it was found. Now, several witnesses, in fact 4 witnesses, saw a blue van at that site where the severed head was found. 2 of those witnesses saw a van there on August 7th, so that would been like 2.5 days before it was found, because it was at midnight, 12:30 in the morning. And so that would have been 2.5 to 3 days after it was found. Now, I contacted all those witnesses from that site, and one of the witnesses told me when Adam's severed head was found, he suspected that was related. So he called the Hollywood Police Department and told them that he saw a man in a blue van stopped. He was standing on this little bridge with a white bucket. He took something out of the white bucket and threw it, something round out of the white bucket and threw it into the water. You know what he was told by the detective that he talked to? He doesn't know who the detective was. He doesn't recall his name.
What?
But he was told, yeah, we already know about the blue van. It has nothing to do with the Adam Walsh case.
So stupid. Just dismissive left and right over facts that many people are reporting. They're looking past these composite drawings. They're looking past the fact that the blue van was seen, and just they got tunnel vision. They found who they believed were their top suspects and just wouldn't release. That's where their focus stayed.
Exactly. They got so focused on James Campbell. I mean, they grilled him month after month. And, John Walsh finally hired an attorney to get them to send them a letter to leave Campbell alone. That's the only way they would finally stop bothering him. I mean, they were calling him every kind of name you could think of. In the interrogation, you could hear him all the way down the hallway screaming at him, calling him
Hold tight, Willis. We have to take a break. We'll come back and continue this conversation here on the Tom Barnard Show. Welcome back to the Tom Barnard Show. I'm Dave Schrader. Today we're talking with Willis Morgan. Frustrated Witness, his book, not only implicates Jeffrey Dahmer, but presents the facts to the court of public opinion in hope that it will ultimately bring justice for Adam Walsh. We've been hearing some of the more compelling arguments that you've made. And again, it's to me, maybe because I've heard your story so often, Willis, and I've seen all of the information on it, it just makes sense to me as I was talking off air with the guys in studio here. what are the odds that you have one of the most prolific and horrific serial killers just miles away, who was also witnessed at the mall the day that Adam Walsh vanished, who had access to a blue van, and that he hasn't had more scrutiny, and more of the light shown on him regarding this is beyond me. It leaves at least enough of a shadow of a doubt that it could be anybody else that I think they definitely need to reinvestigate this case. Do you think it's ever going to get that reinvigoration without the nod of John Walsh? I'm pretty sure if John Walsh came out tomorrow and said, you know what, I think this needs to be reopened, I believe they would reopen it. I think out of courtesy to John Walsh is why they're just leaving things alone. Do you believe that might have a big factor into why the police department just wants to leave this be, aside from then having to admit their mistakes and the fact that a lot of those people have now moved up in the ranks throughout law enforcement? Do you think we'll ever see it happen without the nod of John Walsh?
No, and they've not only moved up through the ranks, but they're all hiding in their retirement, most of them. So they don't want to talk about it. Like I said, Michelle Solomon did a podcast about it. She tried to contact the police chief. He said, everything I said during that closing is all I have to say. He won't say anything further. So, they're all in cover-up mode. But let me tell you, the police, I filed a lawsuit against this Detective Joe Matthews, okay? Now, we talked about that blue van. That blue van is at all three locations relevant to Adam's abduction. At the Hollywood Mall, numerous witnesses saw Adam being tossed into a blue van, okay? At the site where Adam's severed head was found, okay? Witnesses saw a blue van there. And, of course, where Jeffrey Dahmer worked, there was a blue van that was owned there. So, in Joe Matthews' book, he writes, on page 27, I think it's 26 or 27, he writes, all those blue van sightings, to me, are about as worthless as the sightings of the Loch Ness Monster. So this is John Walsh's knight in shining armor, the guy that closed the case pinning it on this guy, Otis Toole, who had nothing to do. Let me tell you, in my book, I list other cases.
Well, wait, let me ask you one thing. You said that you brought up a lawsuit against him?
Oh, I did, yes.
In what effort? What was the hopes?
Well, because at the time, he refuses to this day to show this manuscript. And now he wrote a 400-page manuscript and gave it to the police chief and bamboozled the police chief into closing the case based on his manuscript, okay? Now, according to Florida Sunshine laws, anything that's accepted that in a case has to become part of the case files and subject to Sunshine laws.
Freedom of information?
Public domain. Okay. So anyway, I asked for those that file. The Hollywood Police Department refused to show it to me. Joe Matthews refused to show me his book, and yet he writes in his book that he wants that manuscript that he wrote to be used by police departments throughout the country as an example of how to solve a case, a cold case. How to investigate a cold case. But yet now, all of a sudden, when I filed a lawsuit, he refuses to show it to anybody. So I filed a lawsuit against him. Now, the problem is, down here we don't have a justice system. We only have a system because our system is so corrupt, with political expediency. He hires this attorney that donates to these judges, donates money, and down here they have a cap on how much you can donate in Florida. It's $500. But he gets around that law by donating his $500, his wife donates $500, his 6-year-old daughter donates $500, his wife's business donates $500, his even younger son donates his $500. Where does a 4-year-old get $500? I have no clue. What does he know about donating to anybody? But this is what they do. So they go before these judges to get favorable decisions, and a common citizen down here will never get justice because, listen, I have a letter in the police files. These moronic cops put these letters in their police files. Now, one of those letters, when Joe Matthews gave that manuscript that he wrote to the Hollywood police chief, Chad Wagner wrote a letter to the state attorney's office and attached it to that report that he made, that manuscript, saying, we would like you to look over this because we would like to close the case based on this manuscript. Okay? So that's pretty clear that they read it and gave it to the state attorney's office. So now the state attorney has their own case files. Okay? Now, they don't have that manuscript either. They refused to show it. But they wrote a letter back when it was given to them, back to the police chief, when they returned it, saying, yes, we agree with everything in this manuscript. What a great report this is, showing how Artist 2 murdered Adam Walsh. Okay? Now, which means they accepted it, and they read it. Now, how clear is that this should be part of the case files? Yet, when I sued, my case was thrown out because they said, well, the police chief said he didn't use it. It doesn't matter. According to Sunshine Law, it doesn't matter whether you agree with it, because they've been wrong so many times before. You know, who's to say their opinions aren't wrong one more time? And even if they are wrong or right, it's all irrelevant. Once you accept it, it has to be part of the case files. Nobody wants to show it.
Let me mention something, Willis, and I'll mention it to you guys here in studio. Here's a part of this when you were asking me, Doug, where do I stand on this? Does it make sense? Here's an interesting aspect of this. Willis Morgan is publicly on major radio shows and TV interviews and in a book saying, this is how you screwed up. This is how you lied and covered this stuff up. If it was incorrect and he was besmirching your character, wouldn't you log a lawsuit against him for libel?
You would think so, sure.
Do you know why somebody wouldn't do that?
Well, it's kind of agreement by silence, right?
Well, but there's also the case that if I decide to sue Willis because I feel he's tearing down my character, his attorney gets then to depose me, and they can ask any questions they want, which now puts me under the gun. And that suddenly can flip on them real quickly and get this case reopened or reexamined because of that. So it's interesting and very telling to me that by doing nothing regarding all of the allegations that Willis is throwing out there, it does seem to build a bit of a credibility factor to me that...
No, I agree. So my question is...
They're trying to cover something up.
What evidence do they actually have to either prove or disprove this? And it's difficult because, you know, the possible perpetrators are all dead.
Right. Well, it was Otis Toole's admission.
Right.
And then recanting. But then he admitted. But then he recanted.
Yeah.
So you've got a known liar who also took, and if I remember this correctly, Willis, right? He had stepped up. We don't even know if this guy killed anybody more than one person.
Yeah.
But he stepped up, and didn't he make claims of killing like some insane amount of people?
50 or something. I don't remember. It was a lot.
How about hundreds?
Yeah,
hundreds.
He
Okay.
He made claims. And
once you get past 5, it's a lot.
You just stop counting, right? But the point is...
Detectives were all over the country fighting like traders at the stock market to interview Artist Toole. You know, so because they wanted to clear cases in their states, and boy, you know,
Lindbergh
he was
kidnapping.
a one-man crime stopper. You know, he was solving cases all over the country. Only after they realized that the timelines clash. You can't be in New Jersey and California within the same hour. And so one by one, they all dismissed them except for one police department, and that's the Hollywood Police Department. But eventually they dismissed them as well, except for that one detective we talked about.
So that, to me, is an interesting aspect of this case. With about 5 minutes left here, give us some of the most compelling arguments for you as well, Willis, to wrap up so people that are still on the fence can see a little bit more into the rabbit hole you've been taking us into.
Well, I went to the Hollywood Police Department, you know, just before they closed the case, okay? And I went there and tried to have an appointment with the police chief, Chad Wagner, and he had his goonies do all but threaten me with arrest, telling me that I just admitted I was at the Hollywood Mall on that day. For all they know, I could have done it. They said, how would you like it if we arrest you right now? And this one detective backs up a couple steps with a smirk on his face and folds his arm like a tough guy and says, so, do you think you want to come back here again? These are the kind of detectives we're dealing with. I mean, obviously that didn't threaten me. I mean, it's a joke. I'd love for them to arrest me.
Right.
You know, and I'd love for Joe Matthews to sue me. I dare him in my book to sue me. You know, what you said about him doesn't even touch the surface about what I say about him in my book. I mean, I call him every scathing thing you can imagine in my book. And yet he does nothing except to go on Amazon and write a one-star review about my book called, "This is a junk of a book. You got to go read it." And then the two-star review as well, Frustrated Witness is a domino theory to nowhere. Those are them.
But here's the funny thing, right? A domino theory won't work if there aren't other dominoes to fall into, right? If it's not making sense and saying that this domino theory falls into nowhere, but you've illustrated a pretty compelling story and tying it to a guy who was there that even his own father believes he had a hand in this murder and said so at the time. It's
right.
I understand the title Frustrated Witness and how so many of the witnesses, and you've been kind enough to bring them on to different shows with me, that have also seen him, encountered him, and knew that he was active and in that area. And certainly now, and Doug brought up a quick point. Where was Dahmer originally from? Was it like Indiana or something?
No, he was from Ohio.
Ohio, that's right. So then he went into the military. He ended up in Florida. Then, of course, eventually in Milwaukee, where his killing spree finally came to an end. But during any of this, did Dahmer ever try to lay claim to it? Or you said that he kind of, gave a statement. Can you tell us what that was?
Well, to the FBI agent that was interrogating him or interviewing him, he told him, he says, listen, Neil, he says, anybody that confesses to Adam won't live a week in prison. So that's what he said. And
well, he didn't make it very long, as I recall.
He put that as a near confession.
I think he made it a year or two in prison,
maybe.
Yeah, let me explain something to you. What you were saying about Matthews and filing a lawsuit against me. I would love for them to do that, because then, keep in mind, that would be a lawsuit in front of a civil jury.
Right.
Who is not held hostage to political expediency.
Right. And civil juries you have to do less proof as well to kind of get that case.
I don't need less proof. There's all the proof you want if you read the book. Let me say real quick, if anybody, I'm not asking anybody to buy the book, but at least go on Amazon and read the 1- and 2-star review, as well as comments other reviewers gave to those stupid reviews. But read that. You can go to my website. It's free, frustratedwitness.com, and listen to some of the interviews with other witnesses, and listen to one interview on the Convicting the Innocent page that Joe Matthews did on a radio show, bloviating about how Artist 2 ate all his victims, including, quote-unquote, Adam. And then when I heard that radio show, I called them, and I told them who they just did an interview with, and they let me and Mia Taylor, who you know, Dave, do another interview. So I put those two interviews side by side. You listen to Joe's interview and listen to Mia and myself, and you decide who you think is telling the truth. That time I was threatened with arrest, I was so incensed, I went out and paid, because they refused to give me one. I went out and paid for my own polygraph test. And, of course, I passed with flying colors.
Willis, thank you for continuing to beat the drum and try to keep this story out there. And how often do you hear the author say, you don't even have to buy my book, just go read the reviews?
Yeah.
That's, again, another piece of the puzzle. But I recommend, if you want a compelling read and you're into the aspect of true crime and would like to see this full narrative unfold before you, pick up the book Frustrated Witness and check it out. Willis, thank you again for coming on and spending some time.
Thank you.
And as you, if any other news breaks, please let us know. We'd love to visit with you again. That's it for today, and wrapping up the Tom Barnard Show. It's always good to sit in with you guys. Thank you for being a part of this with me.
That was a blast.
What do you guys think when you hear a case like this and then there's a new shot of invigoration? Should we, is justice still important for the victim?
That's really a great question. So the victim's obviously dead,
right?
His
parents want to move
past? Is this
past?
Otis Toole guy dead too?
Yes.
And Dahmer's dead. So at some point it's like, so we're trying to solve this because...
Yeah.
Well, I understand the want and desire that, the truth should be told.
Yeah, accurate
and
historical
especially
record.
in this case, it should be. And who is the voice of the victim if nobody else is stepping up?
But that was the point, because obviously I don't know anything about it,
right.
Just the basics everybody knows. But what physical evidence do they have that, let's say they decided to reinvestigate this?
Yeah. Yeah,
what
that's the whole point is.
I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to have somebody. I can't believe Netflix or somebody else hasn't stepped up to take this book and
Get
re-examine
the making
it.
of a murderer, guys.
That's what I'm saying. Well, that's it. Hey, check me out, Midnight in the Desert, Monday through Friday. You can check me out at midnightinthedesert.com. And tomorrow, you guys have some comedians coming in. You've got Tom back on Monday. Thank you for tuning into the Tom Barnard Show.